Hi guys, welcome to the first of a 5-part series where I'm going to go through some of the basic elements of Adobe Lightroom Classic. These videos are going to be perfect for anyone who's never used any Adobe programs before, or for those people who may be somewhat familiar with something like Photoshop, for example, but maybe have never touched Lightroom before. So first of all, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of Lightroom. Why do we want to use this as photographers as opposed to, say, using primarily Photoshop all the time? Well, you can kind of think of Lightroom as your photographic library. Here we can organize, edit, catalog, print, upload, and lots of other things. It's kind of like your hub, your main hub for all of your images. When you open an image in Photoshop, for example, you work on that file and then you save what you've done to open it later, or if you finished, you close the file. Lightroom works in a different kind of way. When you first load the software, it will ask you to create a new catalog. So you might already be in this position where you've already created a catalog file. This catalog file will save all the information about your edits, your catalog preferences, and essentially anything you do within the software. Your actual images will be saved in a location of your choosing on your computer. Lightroom is then showing you a preview of these images. What this means in practice is that when you open Lightroom, everything will be as you left it. If you were in the middle of an edit, you can carry on with it. There's no need to save your progress as you go. And this has so many benefits, but one of the most obvious ones is that all of your photos are always just a few clicks away. If you want to access a photo you edited in Lightroom 2 or 3 years ago maybe, if it's in the same catalog, you can easily find it and either make a new edit of the file or export it as a different size for upload or printing, for example. And when you learn how to use the organizational tools within Lightroom, things like this become even more powerful. So to start with, I'm going to give you an overview of the different panels, what they are, how you can hide or show them. This is going to help you as a beginner to get over the initial intimidation some people can experience when loading a new piece of software for the first time. We have 4 panels that surround our main image window. And you can see at the very edges of the screen, we can see arrows. So at the top, bottom, left and right, we can see little arrows. Now what we can do is we can click on each of these arrows, and what that's going to do is it's going to automatically hide each of those panels. And you can see how much more space we have now to view our thumbnails. So if I click them again, they'll come back. Or I can just hover over them like this, and they will kind of show us a preview. So I can still access the different things in the menu. When I move my mouse back, it will go away. Or I can click on it to bring it back completely, like that. This can be especially useful if you want to make more room for your main image window. A good example of this would be hiding both the top and bottom panel to make more room for a portrait image on a smaller display. Obviously you can see here I've got images in Lightroom already. You might be at the stage where you don't have any images in Lightroom. So to quickly do that, all you need to do is put your mouse to the top here. You need to click File and then Import Photos and Video. It will then come up with a box asking you where you want to copy from and where it's going to go. So you will probably have your C drive and maybe an SD card in here as well. I've got my other storage drives listed here. You might not see something like that. But essentially you can then select the different imagery you have. So in my case, I would go to my photography drive and it's already got where I have my film scans. So I would select a different folder for my images, and then you can select the ticks to either select or deselect the ones you want to import or don't want to import, and then where it's going to. So at the moment it's just going to default to your catalog. So that's because these images are already on my computer. But for example, if you were copying from an SD card, this option on the right hand side would be where it's being saved to. So do you want to save it to my pictures, or do you want to select somewhere else? Once you've got all that and you're happy, you can then click import down at the bottom right, which is at the moment underneath me, but it's just a little box that says import. So I'm just going to click cancel for now because I've already got some images in here for demonstration. So now if we look at the film strip along the bottom, this is the film strip panel. Here you can easily click on different images within the folder or collection you're currently in. On mine here, you can see it says all photographs, just here where I'm moving my mouse. That's because I have that folder selected. So it's going to show me all my images currently in my Lightroom catalog, and I can use my mouse wheel to start scrolling through this panel here, or I can click the thumbnail icon just here to open it up in the main image window as thumbnails. You can change the thumbnail size by using the little slider just here, and you can make them bigger or smaller. Now to start with, chances are once you import your first set of images, this might not say all photographs. This might say previous import, for example, and that's going to show you the most recent set of imported photos that you have. But I can quite easily click this little arrow here and I can choose different folders. If you've just started, you probably won't have any folders listed here until you start importing some. But what we can do is just click all photos, and that's quite an easy one to navigate to the main area where all of the photos you've imported into Lightroom are. So if you ever get stuck, or if you find yourself in a folder you're not sure how you got to, just click that little arrow, click all photographs, and it'll take you back to every image you have in Lightroom. Sticking with the film strip along the bottom, you can see some other options we have here. You can change to thumbnails there as well, but also we can see a little 1 and a 2 here. Now, this is going to be useful if you have multiple displays, if you have a secondary monitor hooked up to your computer. So you can click number 2, and what that's going to do is open up a secondary window that you can drag to another display, which is really useful. So you can have maybe on one display your main image window and your editing controls, and on your other display you can have your grid, your thumbnail view, so you can easily switch between different photos by using both displays without having to change your view. So I can't exactly show you that now because I'm only recording one display, but once you click that, if you have 2 displays enabled, it will automatically pop up on the other display, and then you can hold down left click to show different views. So you could have it as a grid display or a main image window, whatever you like really. Also, what we can do with the film strip is we can move our mouse to about here till the cursor changes, and then we can click and drag to make this larger or smaller. And you can do that with the left and the right hand as well. So now looking at the left hand panel, this is where we have the information about our different folders, collections, and different publishing services. For now, in this tutorial, we're not going to be speaking too much about the things going on here, but in a later video, I will be talking more about collections and organization, which is where this will come into play. But probably the most important thing at the moment is the navigator up at the top. So I can click these little arrows to collapse these things so it looks a bit tidier, and then we can see our navigator up at the top here. And here we can change different things about our zoom. So when we have an image selected full screen, and all I did to get that open full screen was double click on it in the thumbnail view, I can then single click on the image to zoom in, and that's going to zoom in. We can see it changing up in that top left. We can see it goes from fit to 50%. If I change that to 100%, it's going to zoom from fitting to view to 100%. And you can click the little arrow here to change that to whichever kind of zoom you want. And that will be really useful to change depending on what kind of resolution image you're working with. A lower resolution image, you may want to keep it on 50%, for example, but on a really, really high resolution image, you will be able to zoom in a lot more because you have that many more pixels to be able to do that. So that's why it gives you that choice. So now looking at the right-hand panel, this will show us different information depending on which module along the top here we have selected. Right now I'm in the library module, so it's going to show me different options compared to if I had develop selected. As you can see here, when I change over to develop, we can see the options have changed on this panel now to show my editing controls, which I will go over in a bit more detail in a moment. As you've just seen, this top bar gives us 7 main different modules to choose from. The only ones I'm going to be covering in these videos is library and develop. mainly because these are the only ones you will use 95% of the time. So now looking at the library module, this is where we can see all our images on a grid if we like. We can change it back to single view, but mainly it's used for viewing our images as a grid. Now, the powerful thing with the library module is here you can do your organization. You can sort through your images and you can get to a stage where things are easy to find and catalog. And there's a few different tools we can use to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click on this image, and we can see lots of different options have come up, but there's 3 things to pay attention to here in terms of organization. So there are 3 in the middle: set flag, set rating, and set color label. Now you don't have to use all 3 of these. You might only want to use 1 or 2. That's fine, but you can use all 3 in conjunction with each other to help you get really organized and be able to find things very easily, or sort things into different categories really easily. So a good example of that is if you have a large amount of images from a single shoot, you may want to go through a process of selecting the best ones and eliminating the ones you don't want. And maybe you want another section for images you feel have potential for editing, but you're not quite sure maybe. So what you can do is give them a different color label. So we have choices from red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. On their own, they don't actually mean anything. They only really mean anything once you give them meaning. So the way I normally do it, and this could be different for you, but the way I do it is red is no good. Green is good. So kind of like a traffic light system. Yellow could be a maybe, you know, and then you have blue and purple, which don't necessarily fit into a traffic light system. But you could maybe give them their own category. They could be something individual to you. It could mean anything you like whatsoever. But the red, yellow, and greens I find useful as a traffic light system. So red, you're going to discard. Yellow is a maybe. Maybe you're going to try and edit, see how it works. Green are the ones you know straight away you like and you want to do a proper edit of. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this to green. And I'm going to select the ones I like from this set of images. So I'm going to right click on that one and click green. And I'm going to choose one more. I'm going to choose that one, right click, color label, green. So now we can see 3 of those images are selected as green. But it hasn't separated them out. It hasn't done anything. All it's done is mark them as green. So imagine for a second you've gone through 100 images and you've marked 35 of them as green. It still will come up like this. But what we now need to do is navigate our mouse to the top menu here. And we can see we've got some different options. What we want to choose is attribute. What this is going to now let us do is select those different options. So whether we've given it a flag, a rating in stars, or a color. So now what I can choose is I can choose that green color. If I click that, it's only going to come up with those images that are marked as green. So it's a really quick and easy way of going through a large amount of images, marking them as a certain color, and then being able to see them all together in one place afterwards. So I can easily see all the ones I've marked as an individual color. Or the same would be true if I used the star rating system or the flag system. Flag is just flagged or unflagged essentially. So you can give it a tick or a cross, really. So it works in a similar kind of way. And that's why I say you don't have to use all of them. But you could, for example, go then through all your green photos and flag all the green photos you know are 100% your best, for example. There still might be some question in those green photos. So to get out of this, all I need to do is click that green label again, and it will deselect that from the attribute, and I'm back to my main image window where I can see all my photographs. Now you know how to get some images into Lightroom and how to begin sorting them. I'm now going to show you how to make some basic adjustments to an image and then export it. And when I say export it, remember how Lightroom works as a library. We're not necessarily saving anything. We're not necessarily saving anything in Lightroom like we would go in Photoshop File, Save As, for example. we can just close the software whenever we like. So when you're finished with an edit, you actually have to manually export that image or a set of images. So once we've done those basic adjustments, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So firstly, we need to go over to the develop module like we did earlier. So I'm going to go over to develop, and we can see our options have changed on the right hand side. Now if yours looks a little bit different to mine, then that might be because I've got mine expanded a little bit. And remember I said you can change the sizes of these. So we can click on the little option here, and then we can click and drag to make this larger or smaller. Now I prefer it a little bit larger to stock. Normally when you first open it, it'll be something like this, but I prefer a little bit more fine control on the sliders, so I like to make it just a little bit bigger like that. So right now I only want you to focus on the tab that says basic. So if I collapse these like I did on the other side, we can see lots of different options, but the only one I want you to focus on, like I said, is basic. Here we can do things like change your image from color to black and white if that's something you want to do. We can change the white balance, so where it says temperature and WB, that stands for white balance, and we can adjust that. If you feel your image is too cool, we can make it warmer, or if it's too warm, we can make it cooler. So your cameras do have a white balance setting as well, but if you haven't quite got it right in camera, then you can make that fine adjustment just here. Now a little tip before I move on, when you make any adjustments to any of these sliders, a really useful tip, just say for example I've made lots of different changes in these sliders. Obviously I'm not paying too much attention to what this image looks like right now, I'm just making lots and lots of changes so you can see the sliders are massively different. Okay, now if you want to quickly reset sliders back to zero, back to baseline, you don't have to try to get that slider back to zero. Now with some trackpads and mice, it can be fairly easy to do that, but it's much easier just to double click on the word. So I double clicked on exposure there and it went back to zero. Or highlights, I can double click on that and it will go back to zero. Or I can double click on the main title word. So for example, where it says tone or presence, I can double click on those and it will reset that section back to zero completely. And then we go, I can see on tone as well, it will reset that back to zero. So really quick and easy to get things back to zero, double click on the words. So we can also see these options that I've just kind of messed around with there to show you that. There's lots of things there. Some of them will be self-explanatory, I hope, like things like exposure. We're very simply making the image overall brighter or overall darker. We're changing the overall exposure of the whole image. So all of these changes here, anything we change with these sliders, these are called global adjustments. And that's a really important terminology to understand. We're changing everything about the whole image. So we can see that if we change the contrast, the whole image will get more contrasty or less contrasty. I can double click that to get that back to zero. Or shadows, for example, I can bring the shadows down. All the shadows in the whole image will get darker. The same is true for whites, blacks, and everything within this menu. Now, in a later video, I'm going to go over local adjustments, which are where we change specific parts of the image. And that is using some of the different tools along the top here, which I won't cover in this video, but keep an eye out for a later video where I will talk specifically about those local adjustments. A good example of that is if I wanted to just change the sky, maybe I want to make it more saturated or bring the highlights down just on the sky. And that can be used in a number of different applications. It can be used for lots and lots of different things. Maybe you just want to bring up the shadows in a specific area. So we will go over that in a later video. But for now, all you need to necessarily do to get started practicing with Lightroom is be playing around with these sliders here. And I say play around for a very specific reason. And that isn't because I can't necessarily tell you what to do. It's because every image is different. The image you're looking at here will be different to the image you have loaded. So it's very difficult for me to say, you can change your exposure by this much, or your shadows by this much, etc. I can't give you that information necessarily because your image will look different and have different editing needs. So you have to make a judgment call based on that really. But when I say play around with these sliders, It's more about getting used to the software. So if you're not sure what a given slider does, a good example of that might be something like clarity. It's not maybe as self-explanatory as something like exposure. Then what you need to do is very simply raise it up to the top and bring it down to the bottom. And you can see what it's doing is essentially it's adding mid-tone contrast in a lot of ways. It adds a kind of a grittier look to an image. So if you are to use clarity, use it sparingly. It can look quite garish if you crank it all the way up, but in the right circumstances, it can be quite a useful slider, maybe some targeted adjustments. But essentially, you need to load in an image, play around with these basic adjustments, get it to a stage where you feel like you're happy and you haven't gone too far with it. You don't want to over edit your images. Once you're kind of happy with it and you consider your image finished, what we then do, instead of going File, Save, like we would do in Photoshop, for example, what we can do is right click on the image, go down to Export, Export again, and then when I drag it over from my other monitor, a window will appear, which is your export dialog box. And what that's giving us is different options about how we're going to export that file. Now, if I collapse these menus, we can see we have lots of different options, lots and lots of different options to choose from. You won't need to touch most of them, to be honest with you. The most important one to start with is the export location. So we can put it in a subfolder. So you can see at the moment mine's going to my desktop, and then you can put it in a subfolder. So I can click test, and then that's going to be in a folder on my desktop called test. Or it might not be in a folder, it will just be the image on my desktop like that if I have it unticked. So that's just where it's going. You can click choose there to choose a specific folder if you want it to go to a hard drive or something like that, for example. We can then go to file naming, we can give it a name. A good way of using that is if you were exporting a large amount of images and you wanted them all to have a logical name with a number sequence, for example. So we could go rename to custom name, file name sequence. So they're all going to have a number at the end, which will start from 1 if I put 1 in there, or custom name sequence. So it could be test 1, and then the first one will be test 1, the second one will be test 2, etc. So that can be quite a good way of exporting images for a client, for example. I use that a lot for wedding images. So here I would use the couple's name, and then it would be their name, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So when they are then talking to me about images they may want to have printed, they can say, I want this image very clearly, which number. If it's just a single image for yourself that you're going to maybe put on the internet, a custom name of your choice is fine. It could be something, as long as you know what it is, doesn't really matter. Now there are probably two other ones you want to focus on. That's file settings and image sizing. So in file settings, we can choose different file formats. Most of the time, you're probably going to be choosing JPEG for ease of use. But if you want to save something as a high quality file, like an archival type file, or something you may be going to work on in Photoshop, you may want to save it as a TIFF, or other use cases, you may want another file type. But for now, JPEG is fine for a normal image file that you maybe want to upload to the internet or print. You can make sure that the quality is up to 100%. Now mine has limit file size ticked from the last time I used it. That can be useful if you encounter upload limits. So for example, if you're going to email something and you have maybe a 25 megabyte file limit, or if you're going to upload something to Facebook and you have the same issue, here you can change the file size and limit it so it doesn't go above a certain number. So it's listed here in K, so that stands for kilobytes. So it's still going to be a high quality file, but it's going to reduce that file size for you. Say for example, you needed to have it under 10 megabytes, you could find out easily how many kilobytes are in a megabyte. It's 1,000. So if it's 5 megabytes, I'm choosing 5,000. We can also choose image sizing. Now, you're probably not going to use this to start with, but if you are going to be printing your images, this can be useful. So a good way of doing that is just clicking resize to fit and then just choosing the long edge, because that means that the image won't distort. It's just changing the long edge. It's going to keep those proportions correct so that when you then come to print, so that everything looks as it should. But for now, I'm going to leave that unticked. We don't want to change the image size. We just want to have a full quality JPEG file. So once I'm happy with all these options, I'm then going to click export. And you can see a little progress window come up in the top left. With one image, it will go away very quickly. But if you have a couple of hundred images you're exporting, you'll see a progress bar up in the top left there showing you when it's finished. We can then see, I will open up the image. There we go. It's just been saved on my desktop. It doesn't look any different because I haven't done anything to it. But once you have edited your image, this new file you've saved will have your edits saved with it. So that when you go back to Lightroom, you can then make any other changes you want. So maybe you want to create a black and white and a color copy. So you could have exported that color copy. I might want to make a black and white copy now. So this edit you're doing in Lightroom is always there. It's always kind of changeable. You can always come back to it and make tweaks. So you might, in a month's time, come back to it and say, oh, I might want to change something about that, and then make some tweaks. But for now, guys, that is the first part of this video series finished. Have a play with Lightroom, see how you get on, and look out for the next video. Thanks for watching.